Hi, everyone. Welcome to a conversation with the Globe's Baseball Hall of Fame voters. My name is Katie McInerney, and I am the assistant sports editor here at the Boston Globe. We're really grateful to have you all joining us. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Bob Ryan is here with us, Peter Abraham. We have Dan Shaughnessy, Alex Spear, Tara Sullivan, Bob Holer, and Michael Silverman. It's great to have everyone here tonight. It's such a special thing for the Globe to have so many people who participate in this. And I know you all take very seriously your participation in who you choose and why you vote the way you do. So we won't waste any time doing that stuff because we want to get to the good things. So as you probably saw at globe.com today, we published our annual Hall of Fame voting package. I definitely encourage you to check that out if you haven't yet. In there's a table to show who's on the ballot, who we voted for, and some explanation into why. I'm going to toss it over to Bob Holer first to help us start up here. So an interesting thing about the Globe's ballots this year, 7 voters, no unanimous selections. A couple of people had only one person voted for them. Only 2 votes for Manny Ramirez, only 1 for Sammy Sosa. Only 5 candidates got 5 or more votes, which is really interesting. And Bob described it earlier to me as a circus. And so, Bob, I wanted to ask you, is this typical? Can you explain why it might be like this? And what do you think leads to the fact that no one seems to be able to decide who should be in the Hall of Fame this year?
Well, we're really a quirky bunch. There's about 400 voters, right? And a lot of them, most of them are kind of like me. We earned the right to vote, at one point covering baseball. We don't do it anymore like Peter and Alex do every day in and day out. They're on the beat. So some of us are Big Tent guys. We think that as many candidates as are worthy should be inducted. Some are small tent guys. We think only the very, very best should be in. So it's got this big top quality with all these different characters and different opinions, and it does have this circus-like quality. I checked the Baseball Hall of Fame tracker website recently. Great website, I recommend it. And there's about 150 votes registered so far, public votes. And Ortiz is doing very well with about 83% of the votes. And the other 17% have valid reasons for not voting for him. Either, he's not a first ballot or he's not a Hall of Famer at all. But what I found quirky is that among that 17%, there are 4 voters who voted for, Bobby Abreu, but not for David Ortiz. 5 voted for Jimmy Rollins, not David Ortiz. 1 voted for Joe Nathan, not David Ortiz. And 4 voters altogether voted for nobody at all. They cast their ballots and intentionally voted for so nobody's worthy at all. So it's a really quirky thing. And here we are at our little ring of the circus here, and we're welcome everybody to who joined us tonight. We look forward to sharing this with you and talking about our little corner of the show.
Just don't put me in the clown car, Bob.
So it's interesting because in your explanations, Dan, you wrote that you think Ortiz is in no problem. Pete has this entire time while we've been planning this package always warned me it's not definite. We're not sure that he's going to get in, and it could be very close. Dan, why do you think it's dead set that he's getting in?
Well, Bob's right. The track was really useful, and I think it's 40% of the votes have been declared at this point. So you've got 60% that have not declared theirs. The Globes are counted now in the tracker. And David, I believe he's getting in based on having looked at that in the past. The tracker always has high numbers early on, and it'll go backwards. Everybody goes down as more of the codgy old bastards like myself don't vote for people. They come out with smaller ballots, and guys like Ortiz, Bonds, Clemens, etc., they will go backwards as it gets closer. But I think Ortiz having 83% with 40% counted, that's going to take a lot of no's the rest of the way to get that under the magic number of 75%. So I think he is getting in. Pete and I have talked about that at some length, and good for him. But I think he'll be the only one I think that'll get in. Bonds and Clemens, they are getting a little bit of a push. People at the end who have not voted for them saying, well, it's their last time on the ballot, vote for him this year. I understand that logic. I don't think it'll be enough to get him over 75, and it'll be really interesting because that turns them over to the Veterans Committee in perpetuity. And if you don't make it on the writer's ballot in 10 years now, you go off to the Veterans Committee. So, but I think for David, I think it'll be a good outcome in a couple of weeks when that's announced. And again, good for him. Everybody in Boston loves him. We understand why.
All right, Pete, why do you think it's so close?
Well, there are actually people out there who do algorithms on the public ballots and try to figure out how far will somebody fall as more ballots come in. They compare it to previous similar candidates. There's a whole science, sort of a cottage industry, in trying to figure out the Hall of Fame. And those people are all predicting it's going to be very close. It could come to within a few ballots either way. So it's interesting. David is he's not a slam dunk guy. There's issues people could have with him. That's understandable. But he's also a player everybody knows. I think everybody has an opinion on one way or another. So this is going to be a very interesting Hall of Fame ballot for David, and because Clemens and A-Rod, A-Rod's the first time. Clemens and Bonds are on for the last time. Schilling's on for the last time. There's going to be a lot of news that's going to come out of this ballot.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about Bonds and Clemens. I mean, Pete, you wrote at the top of your story that you don't think they're getting in, but you're going to vote for them again. I want to open up to everyone else. Do you guys think that they'll get that last year bump and make it in? I know that some of you did opt to vote for them and some of you didn't.
I don't think there's going to be a groundswell in year 10. I think it happens to some voters. Was it Jim Rice got in at the very end? But
And last year, who was in last year on the in Colorado?
Larry Walker.
Larry Walker, thank you. Was on the last ballot too. But sorry, Michael, but I was wondering if we were on the same wavelength there, that sometimes there's more of like a sympathy, like a willingness to say, yeah, maybe he was good enough because, like a working up, where these two guys, nobody disputes that the numbers are Hall of Fame worthy. It's much more about, can I hold my nose and swallow enough to vote them in, or, so I think it doesn't have as much of an empathy or sympathy element that other people might in their last year on the ballot.
right, exactly, right. They're two special cases, special baseball players, and absolutely special cases, given their strong connections to the steroid era. So I don't know. I don't think, looking at the percentages, I kind of hope I'm wrong. I've been voting for them all the time, but I don't think they're going to get in.
Bob Bryan, have you voted for Bonds or Clemens in the past, and did you consider this year? Oh,
Bob,
you're
you have to
muted.
unmute yourself. Can you hit your bottom left corner there? We'll say I held them over. This is my third year voting, and I was with you, Michael. I put them on my ballot from the start. Anyway,
Where it says mute, hit click where it says mute.
We got you, Bob.
Floor is
All right.
yours.
Yes, we got you.
I have not voted for them. I did not vote for them. I have been dreading this ballot for a long time, ever since all year, dreading this ballot. This whole topic annoys me so enormously. If only we could be talking about baseball, only baseball, gentlemen, baseball, like Jimmy Cannon once said in the press box, but we're not. And we all know we're not. And I can't believe everybody else isn't at least 90% as frustrated and angry about the way this is devolved as I am, okay? I did not vote for them. I had said for years, as you've all heard me say it and write it, that one day I may wake up and say, the hell with it. I'll let them all in. I don't know which juice pitchers pitched to which juice batters. I don't know which tape measure home runs would have landed on the warning track. I don't know which strikeouts would have been hit 450 if they were thrown at 91 instead of 95 or 97. You know where I'm going, okay? We don't know. The Crayola box is eternally gray in this whole steroids thing, and in general terms, all right? But in the end, we all have to look ourselves in the mirror. Are you comfortable voting for them? And with your love of baseball, what you think the Hall of Fame is all about, or are you not? And in the end, I was not comfortable voting for them.
Well said. Alex, this is your first year as a voter. So as Bob says, he's been dreading it. It's an exciting time for Alex. So you're in an interesting situation because you have to set your parameters, the things that you're going to use to guide who you might vote for. Can you tell us a little bit about how you did that? And one of the things I was curious about too, I was talking about this with Scott Thurston earlier, was Todd Helton, because you had an interesting rationalization of him being a key franchise player for them, and that was sort of a thing that you thought put him into the Hall of Fame. Obviously, he's been one of those cuspy candidates as well. So can you tell us a little bit about what it's been like to try to figure out how you're going to vote for this ballot?
Yeah, I really valued the exercise of actually going through this. I talked to a number of players who were peers of those who were on the ballot from the beginning of their careers to the end of their careers, and got feedback from player perception of their colleagues. I also went back and I looked at a lot of Hall of Fame plaques online, which is a kind of interesting thing in its own right. And the thing that was striking to me is that there is a very museum-like, matter of fact quality to those plaques, in which there are almost no references to character. And that includes Jackie Robinson, for instance, where there's basically a throwaway line at the end, ridiculous as this sounds, about his courage in having integrated baseball. But there's nothing about Roberto Clemente's character. There's nothing about reprehensible figures in the history of the game of baseball, whether that's a Cap Anson or whether that's a Kennesaw Mountain Landis or anything else. It is part of a museum in my view of it. That said, I also got an opportunity to talk to a lot of writers who have been dealing with this for a long time, and players who felt very much wronged by that whole era and by the fact that they lost jobs, they lost money, and they lost historical reference points to guys who participated in a way that tilted the playing field. But the history of baseball is a history of tilting the playing field. We ask people to be incredibly competitive, to push these red lines in ways that are not normal for human beings. And then we act surprised when they decide that they're going to doctor a baseball, or that they're going to use any kinds of apparatus that are available in order to steal signs in 1951 or what have you, or in order to take amphetamines that are illegal according to government standards. And by the way, the entire steroid era reflects a failure of society in general, not just baseball, to police this issue, because the FDA did a terrible job of doing anything to regulate supplements. And so you had players left and right walking into GNCs or whatever other malls and finding a shop where they would be able to buy stuff that was loaded with anabolic steroids. So ultimately, I decided that I was voting based on what a guy did, what all of these players did on the field, period. What they did relative to their peers, and it hurts. I agonize for a lot of the players who take offense, who say we don't know for sure that they played clean, and that they feel as if they were done a disservice, and that the history of the game was done a disservice by those who didn't. Now that's the steroid question. Regarding Helton, I did, first of all, he was incredibly dominant, and Bob alluded to this in his write-up of Helton. What he did over a period of about a decade, the numbers are just ridiculous. And Coors Field, of course, has some effect, but no one has performed at Coors Field offensively like Todd Helton did. He was in a separate class that was super elite over the course of about 11 years before injuries, which altitude may have contributed to that. Injury led to decline. On top of that, I do think that there's something really significant about players who are archetypal or iconic in the history of their franchises. And if you grew up as a Colorado Rockies fan, right? If you were born, let's say you were born in 1993 or later, and the Colorado Rockies have meaning to you, right? Then going into the Hall of Fame and seeing a player who is clearly the best and most important figure in the history of your franchise, someone who is a cradle to grave contributor to that franchise, like that has meaning. And I thought that to me reflects what the Hall of Fame, in the most literal sense, kind of is to me.
Well, the first part of that kind of answers Alan's question of, do you think Sammy Sosa should be inducted? And obviously you do. I'm sure some of us will disagree on that, but I'm curious about the latter point. I'm curious if anybody else takes into consideration, which is another question that we had, some of that stuff, like where the player matters within the franchise. And I wonder, does that add into anyone's rationalization? Go ahead, Bob. Brian.
I like to say you learn something every day, and I really believe that. No, seriously, my wife and I kid about this all the time, but I believe that. Alex, thank you for enlightening me. I must say I have never taken that into consideration. I will do so in the future. I think it's a very, very interesting position to take. We lived through that with Yaz, and we understand what that means. Okay, let me just say one thing. How easy, and this may be my personal crusade. I'd like to think not. How easy it would be if the Hall of Fame, a private museum from the Singer family, Singer sewing machines, the Clark family, Singer sewing machines, by the way. All right, if the private museum would simply say to its writers, evaluate all candidates on the numbers only, and make some kind of reference to the fact that PEDs had been involved in baseball a period of time, and many of the people involved in here went through that era. but we have instructed our writers to vote only on the accomplishments, the merits, the numbers, etc. Why won't they do that and stop putting the burden on us to be the judge and jury? Thank you.
Dan, why are you
I
laughing
would
about
just
that?
say, I would just jump in though and say, like, why do you bother like paying attention to that instruction when they don't care, right? Like the plaques don't care, which is where the hall, which is literally the hall. That's the hall that gives the fame. The plaques don't. I think Effa Manley might be the only person who really had, whose role in something of greater significance, namely her contributions to the civil rights struggle, has any mention of character aside from, as I said, that one sentence about Jackie Robinson. It was there. There are so many Clemente Award winners, right? And those
Alex, can if I could just submit to what you're saying, the plaques don't talk about positive character. People aren't in there because of negative character, or whatever you want to call it. It's not enhanced on the plaque. Clemente, Jackie Robinson, et cetera, Tom Seaver once said to us, keep sending us class acts. I can tell you it matters to the people in there. I don't like the fact that Bob's right. It's brutal that we're assigned this charge, asked to, include character in the clause. But, Joe Jackson's not in there because of character. Rose isn't in there because of character. This whole thing we're doing now really started with Rose in the last 30 years, as he never got on the ballot. And then, of course, you had the steroid era. But I can tell you that it matters to the people that are in the Hall of Fame. Go there and talk to them.
I wish they would add to the plaques, for instance, Bonds and Clemens made it in their 10th year, and there's a reason for that. Or, Alex Rodriguez will make it maybe in his 10th year, and there's a reason for that. I mean, these guys obviously were the best players on the field within the lines during their time, but there's a reason that they aren't. At least give us some, let the next generations know something about why they either aren't in or weren't voted in for, a decade.
That wouldn't help us, Bob, explain why DiMaggio took 3 years. No other matter. I don't understand it yet.
So that's a good, actually, go ahead.
Dan, I'm sorry, but like Dan bringing up Rose, which is the one, I didn't have a vote through any of the Pete Rose time, but it does in some ways explain, at least in my head, why, I think if Pete Rose were on now, he would get in, because baseball and all of our pro sports clearly don't care about gambling anymore. No. What used to be the original sin of sports, now they're all in conjunction and they're making money together. So, and I know for me, and I've written this before and I've said it to you guys, but once Bud Selig went in, who oversaw the whole steroid era, and they rewarded him with that, to me, baseball, I just can't punish players for something that baseball.
But Tara, Bud Selig went in on a veterans committee. He did not go with the writers. We shouldn't compound the mistakes that the veterans make by saying, well, they put these guys in, so let's do the same thing.
That's a fair point, but you're using that veteran point of view of only send us class acts. And maybe that's just purely was only Seavers, but
the writers didn't send him out, didn't send him Bud Selig.
It's still the same Hall of Fame. To me, it's just insulting to, but your point is valid.
Tara, in yours, you wrote that you weren't going to vote for A-Rod, at least in this go round, because not only did he take PEDs, and we knew that, but also that he lied about it too. Does that mean that you're going to maybe change your mind in the future, or is the jury still out for you on him?
Yeah, I think I'm resigned to changing my mind. Yes, based on his talent. Is clearly a Hall of Fame talented baseball player. But I just personally, I think there's something. It's maybe to what Bob Holler was just saying. There is something extra special about being that first ballot Hall of Famer. And I know for some, maybe that's a red flag. What's the difference if you're good enough, you're good enough. But I do think there's an extra percentage point there, or an extra distinction. And I just couldn't find it in myself to reward to vote him on the first ballot. I don't know what I'll do in the future, but I'd say, as I'm thinking now, I would be leaning toward him getting a vote in the future, just not on the first ballot.
It brings up another question that somebody asked. Kevin was his name. So I want to ask Michael Silverman and Bob Ryan about this, because both of you are people. Michael, you said in your piece that you're keeping an open mind on some players who still have time. Bob, obviously you added a couple of people this year. Andrew Jones, Scott Rowland, Jeff Kent weren't on your ballot last year. They are this year. So the question is, outside of PEDs, of course, where you might learn new information in between, what what kind of things do you look at to reconsider a player in the future? How do you go back? Is it numbers? Do you do more research? But I guess how does that work? I guess Michael, go first on that one for me.
Well, let's see, I've been voting since 2007. I don't have all the my ballots in front of me, but I think maybe only a couple of times have I added someone late. It's got to be a pretty rare, I just, someone convinced me, made me look at something in a different way. Like maybe next year I'm going to remember what Alex had to say about the importance to a franchise. That was very enlightening, like Bob said. That's an interesting way to look at it. So in saying I'm keeping an open mind, I'm just saying, I just think that's more important to me than going backwards and taking someone off the ballot, which I've been trying very hard and I haven't done, unless I bump into the rule of 10, which is a whole nother issue. We could have a discussion about that, how you can only have 10 people. And one time I had to strategize about who I was going to leave off, which, I don't think the rule of 10 should exist, period. It's arbitrary, but regardless.
Did you consider at all taking off any players this year?
Oh, no. So far, knock on wood, it's, I haven't had any, terrible regrets. So the 5 that were remaining this year, I kept on and I added 2 more, David Ortiz and A-Rod.
Bob Ryan, do you do a lot of tinkering? Do you add and drop over the years, or do you try to keep that same rule where if they're on, they stay on? I guess tell us a little bit about how you decide to add people later on.
This was an unusual circumstance for me this year. To add, as you said, 3 people, and
you dropped one too, right?
We'll get to that. And there's that's a very different reason.
Yes.
3 people, and it's simply a matter of, I underestimated him, kind of thing. You listen to, I have respect for certain people's opinions in this business, a lot of people's opinions, frankly, and certain people specifically, and that advocate the candidacy for people that I have not previously voted for. And I said, you know what, I think he was right. I think I underestimated this person. When I looked at Andrew Jones, and I was an advocate, I wrote this, I was an advocate of Bill Mazeroski. A lot of people aren't. A lot of people don't, think he's deserved the merits because of his offensive side of the game rather than but I think that he was considered by some people not only to be the best second baseman defensively that they've ever seen, but maybe the best player at any position that they've ever seen. And people have actually said that about Mazeroski. I voted for him. A similar thing has been said about Andrew Jones. I just didn't evaluate, just didn't take it into consideration. His 10 consecutive Gold Gloves, and nobody has ever played center field any better than he did. And oh, by the way, 434 home runs on top of that. I say, wow, I think he deserves it. We could go down. I voted for Kent, and I waffled on Kent year after year. But I just looked at the numbers again, and I've got the stuff, and I looked at them, and Jeff Kent, 100 times a second baseman, 100 times knocked in 100 runs. This is as good. This is the argument you can make for Bobby Doerr. Now, Bobby Doerr was apparently a very good second baseman. Kemp was not a good second baseman. I agree to that. And I'm very fallible on this one. And I'm not going to cry if he doesn't get in, and he's not going to get in. I know that. And the third guy was Scott Rowland. And this is a matter of the National League people swear that other than Schmidt, they never saw a better third baseman in their lives defensively. And he was stymied by injury, the only thing that held him back. So I voted for Rowland. Now, I did something I had never done before. I unvoted somebody, and they're back to character. I couldn't be comfortable voting for Omar Vizquel based on the revelations about his personal life that we've had in the last year. And I was an Omar Vizquel guy. And so that's the reason, period. I'm not comfortable. I would not be comfortable sanctioning of Omar Vizquel getting into the Hall of Fame based on the serious allegations of domestic abuse.
I may be the biggest flip-flopper in this group, because 10 years ago when I started voting, I said I was an anti-juicer. I was like, because I was covering the Red Sox in the early, the 2000 to 04. it was just rife. The PED steroid use was just, it was everywhere. And my guy was Brian Daubach, and I remember this guy was not a steroid user. He'd say, look, look at me, look at my body. I'm not and it was obvious he wasn't a steroid user. And this guy was a borderline player, and I always thought it was unfair for him and all these other guys like him. And I swore I'd never vote for a guy I suspected of using steroids at that time. But and now I never would have imagined voting for Bonds and Clemens, but here I am voting for them. And I just, it's so hard to keep them off. And I know I follow the rule, which I learned from Nick, and Pete, I think is also, and Pete as well, that, that 04-05 period where MLB really changed the rules and cracked down on penalties and testing. And so that's sort of the wall. And, so that's why Manny and A-Rod I'm not voting for, because for obvious reasons. But I do think that, and that's why I say, I wish we could just say, I'm voting for these guys, but it's holding my nose, and it's been 10 years. And so that's why, but big flip-flop there.
The next question I had from people, hold on one second. There's an interesting question that we got that I wasn't quite sure what you guys would think about. I think it kind of has to do with exactly what you just said, Bob, the idea that, Pete and a number of other writers in this group and outside of it have established that line where when the people knew that they were breaking the rules, that's when they deserve to be penalized for it when it comes to Hall of Fame. The guys before it, the guys in the Mitchell report, which is obviously inconclusive, that's the one that they're going to say, all right, we'll give them a pass there. Some people will say that. Does anyone think there's like a generational divide here? This is some of the questions from Scott. You think so? Tell me a little bit more why you think that.
Oh, I think big time. I think the younger voters are far more forgiving about this. I understand that. And, it's absolutely generational. And I think that's one of the reasons that the vote tracker goes south, because the younger voters are also quicker to disclose their ballots, like right as soon as they send them in. So you've got a younger constituency that's represented early part in the tracker, and it goes backwards. But yeah, I mean, that's very real, I believe. I mean, we have people like Alex getting his first vote. He voted for 10 and he wished he could have voted for more. If it was just numbers, I could make a case for a lot more guys than I vote for, because the numbers are pretty obvious with Alex Rodriguez, Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, etc. So yeah, you have that. But it's never occurred to me that there were 10 Hall of Famers on a ballot or more. And I think that the charge for the younger voters has been, who are the top 10 guys on this ballot, or who do I like the most on this ballot, as opposed to who are the Hall of Famers on this ballot. I can't speak for anyone how they do it, but I think I see it with some of the stuff on Twitter and how younger voters will put that out there. These are the 10 I like the most. But do you think they're all Hall of Famers? I would ask those guys.
That goes to Michael's point, which he just said. Why? I mean, I don't even know the history, Michael, of the 10, of that, as you called it, arbitrary number.
Looks like Tara froze a little bit. Does anyone know why? Oh, sorry, Tara, you froze. Say what you're going to say.
I was just saying maybe it would be better to not have that 10, because you would just be approaching your vote as, are they Hall of Famer or are they not?
Would that have changed? I mean, Michael, Alex, you're one who said you would have voted for more if you had the opportunity. I guess my question is, do you guys think that the limit is fair? Do you think that people, I mean, can people control themselves enough to not try to put too many people in, or would it create more of a free for all? I guess it goes back to what Bob Poehler was saying at the beginning. Some guys are small tent guys. Some guys want a big haul. But I mean, do you think that they should get rid of the limit of 10? Anyone?
Go ahead, Bob. Go ahead.
I think that's plenty enough, frankly. Look, that ship sailed many, many, many years ago. It is not just the Hall of Fame. It is the Hall of the Very Good. We all know that. So you either accommodate yourself to that or you don't. And I've accommodated myself, with regard to if he's in and why not him. Some people think that's terrible reasoning. I think it's logical reasoning. And so that ship sailed. If you want, I know not everybody's a big fan of Bill of our boy, with the Bill James. I know not everybody's a fan, either one of them, frankly, Bill James or Bill James, but Bill James. But Bill James wrote the definitive story of how the Hall of Fame got to be what it is. And you got to go read it, and everybody should read it if they're going to vote and understand how we got where we are. And we got where we are with the Veterans Committee going amok in the mid 40s, inviting in buddies. And then once we open that gate, we have got we've watered down the Hall of Fame. But I used to say, and I said this 20 years ago, 30 years ago, for everyone we put in, we should throw one out. I'd be very happy to do that. And I'd be very happy to be the chairman of that committee. But so we're in the Hall of the Very Good. Don't kid yourself. If you're going to be a guardian at the gate, fine, but understand that's what you're doing. And, you know, so there should, and here's, let me just, I'll get off the soapbox with one more statement. The flip side of all this, which really drives me crazy, is there should, the idea that the first unanimous guy was a relief pitcher, okay, as good as he was, it nauseates me. There should have been anywhere between 50 and 75 people unanimous before Mariano Rivera. 50 or 75 people, maybe at least 50, that nobody could look you or me or anyone else in the eye and say, he's not a Hall of Famer. Yet, why wasn't he given a ballot, the first ballot? Because there were this jackass people that would not vote for people the first year just because. Oh, I'm ashamed to be a part of any group like that. I'm sorry.
I'm curious if
extreme end. Yeah, the other extreme end of, like, you know, having the 10 viable candidates to, you know, having none, nobody's good enough to get in on the first try. It's the too extreme.
Yeah.
do you guys think Ortiz, oh, go ahead.
No, I just think if the limit was 8 or 9 or 11 or 14 or 15, or there was no limit, I don't think the results really would be that different. In a way, the Hall of Fame is saying that we, the writers, can't control ourselves. We don't know how to vote, and we're going to, you know, institute a cap. I just want to slip that point in there.
And the topic of expanding the number on the ballot was brought up in the last decade. It was something that was explored, that the writers brought up with the Hall of Fame board, and it was a proposal to expand to 12 that was rejected.
Interesting. I didn't know that. So if even though Dan had 10 choices, he only used one on Jeff Kent. And I'm curious if, well, you weren't the only person to vote for Jeff Kent, but I'm curious if you considered any other players on this ballot, taking into consideration the consistency that you've tried to draw with the PEDs. Was there anyone else who even touched a possible Dan vote, or this year and last, I guess?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, a lot of the guys, again, people that don't have, and I feel badly about disqualifying people. Bob brought up Vizquel. I was all set to vote for Vizquel last year. And then the first infractions came forward. And then there were more than this summer, this misbehavior. So, yeah, I mean, that's unfortunate, because I thought he looks like, and Bob's right, you know, 20 years ago when it was just Ron Santo versus Brooks Robinson, it was so much more fun. You know, Louis Tion versus Catfish Hunter, all those things, when it was strictly a baseball, it was so much better. So, yeah, being on the steroid wall still, like I didn't vote for Bagwell, Piazza, guys who just look, Pudge Rodriguez, guys who just look dirty, because too many players said they're dirty, and it was obvious to them. And I don't want to be the arbiter on that, but I don't want to be looking at guys later and say, gee, I wish they weren't in there. So, I'm not going to vote for Ortiz after not voting for Gary Sheffield or Mark McGuire or, you know, Bonds, etc. So he's got an infraction. So, but I think a guy like Roland, you know, that's a tough one. He's very close. And in my view, I wasn't quite there yet. To Bob's point about the Hall of Very Good, you know, Wagner is certainly, you can make a case. A case was made. I'm not big on relievers, so it's unfortunate. I hate the whole thing as much as Bob does, and I sign on to everything Bob has said.
So you mentioned two players, Scott Rowland and Billy Wagner, both of whom Alex and Pete voted for.
Sure.
I guess neither of you share the same concerns that Dan does. Is there, I guess, I don't know that the right phrase is the threshold less, but what made you guys think players like that were Hall of Famers?
Well, for me, with Roland, it was his defense, and we've all come to appreciate. I think baseball in general has come to appreciate defense more in recent years. We're able to quantify it better than we used to, and I think defense. You know, you look at Roland; he was such an outstanding defender. made a difference in the game. I think that's kind of helped his candidacy quite a bit. And also, there's a weird, like the Hall of Fame doesn't have a lot of third basemen for some reason. I'm not sure why that is or how that happened. But he's got numbers that stack up among third basemen in the history of baseball very well. So to me, he was kind of an overlooked guy. And the more I looked, it seemed to make sense to vote for him.
I had trouble getting past him going 0 for 15 against the Red Sox in the 04 World Series.
I will say that with Rolen, it's actually pretty interesting because like the statistical similarities offensively between him and Jeff Kent are enormous, but then he's an 8-time Gold Glover on top of that. So from that vantage point, it became he's a pretty, for me, he was kind of a two-way slam dunk.
But Kent was an MVP. Kent was an MVP in the National League. Rolen only got top 4 once in the top 10. Once in the top 10 of MVP. And the third baseman is supposed to hit more homers than a second baseman. You know that better than anybody.
Sure, no, but even so, with it in the context of the positional adjustment and the overall, the overall cumulative stats of third baseman as third baseman, Rolen ranks very, very well. Was very consistent as an offensive performer. And if you stuck him in a lineup behind Barry Bonds, meaning that he would have had a runner on base about 300 times a year when he was hitting, he probably would have won a couple of MVPs too.
He was hitting with Pujols in 04. He still went 0 for 15. And just so everyone knows, I'm not picking on Alex. I love the book placement in the background. The fact that Francona is right over your right shoulders. Thank you very much.
It's Alex's first year, so we're allowed to pick on him. That's a rule. That's fair.
It will remain true of any year.
Yeah. It's interesting too with relief pitchers. I mean, I feel like it's only going to get more difficult for a relief pitcher to get into the Hall of Fame as the way that they use bullpens. Okay, so why you don't think that most relief pitchers have done enough? I mean, you voted for Mariano too, so it's not. Yeah.
I voted for Rivera, Bruce Sutter, who invented a pitch and was dominant, Rich Gossage, who would pitch 3 innings of relief, Dennis Eckersley, who was a 20-game winner and an ace MVP is out of the bullpen. But no, the Trevor Hoffmans of the world, the compilers. Oh, Craig Kimbrell, when that comes up, I'll be on a jihad on that one. Oh my God, Craig Kimbrell, the man who's only good in a save situation when there's 3 Orioles coming up with a 3-run lead in the 9th. The only time Craig Kimbrell can save a game for you, and he's got a million of them, but he is not a Hall of Fame closer. Thank you very much. So that's another topic.
You know what, Katie? I think that for me is part of the same, and it relates slightly to Ortiz being a DH. Like, I struggle with holding a position against a guy if that position is part of the game. Like this is the game as it is now, specialized pitching. Like, I'm not saying I'm right or wrong, but like that's a struggle for me. Like, this is why I could see, I don't know, Billy Wagner is one I struggled with a lot. I didn't vote for him, but do I diminish the person because their position isn't every inning, every at bat or whatever? It's just hard, but I don't think it's fair. Like DH is something I will quote unquote go to bat for all the time. If it's a full-fledged position in the lineup, it should be treated as such, but it's interesting to hear, maybe that's part of something that's going to be different even going forward as the game gets more and more specialized. Does that end up, excluding more guys just because they won't have maybe a similar comparable body of work in a way?
It's going to be a nightmare. It's going to be bad. No, it is. If the game doesn't change, and there's no indication that it's going to change, that what you just alluded to, Tara, is going to be a significant issue. People aren't going to be able to compile the numbers,
right?
And they're going to be discarded. Right now, they're thinking about relievers. Is anybody you can assemble a new bullpen every year if you try hard enough, and they're utterly disposable commodities.
Well, we used to think 300 wins was an automatic, right?
Oh, yeah, hey, 200 is going to be a big standard from now on.
Yeah, that has.
So we're going to have, whoever the voters of 2030 are going to be having a different world to look at than the one that we've all encompassed.
Well, the thing with relief pitchers too, relief pitchers used to be failed starters, right? These are guys who weren't good enough to be in the rotation. Now relief pitchers are groomed from the draft. That we see this guy as a relief pitcher, and so that it's almost like the Colorado thing. I can't hold it against Todd Helton that he played in Colorado. He got drafted by the Rockies. Was he supposed to say like, well, I refuse to play for Colorado because my numbers will be inflated? I mean, he did what he was supposed to do. So I think if a guy is developed as a reliever and he's a great reliever, I don't know. To me, it's hard to hold that against him. That a team decide, hey, this is where you'll be really good. I don't know. It's gonna, and it's only gonna get harder because there's more of these guys now who are being developed as relievers.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
to the point of to Dan's point about like Bruce Sutter developing the splitter and changing the game that way, I do think that there's kind of an initial wave of relievers that has a historical significance in terms of changing the way that the game has managed and the way that it flows. When this is Billy Wagner to me at least, and I totally respect, by the way, ruling out relievers entirely, right? Like objectively, the value of a reliever in building an organization, building a team is much less than that of a starting pitcher. But the way in which they have an opportunity to transform both the dynamics of a single game as well as the history of the game is pretty considerable. And to me, like Wagner stands out because highest strikeout rate of all time, lowest batting average against of all time, repeat all-star, someone who over the course of a very long career remained distinctly dominant in the role that was given to him.
Michael, what were you going to say?
Oh, just kind of echoing off what other people said, that yes, we should not hold their part-time status of a reliever and a DH against them. We have to accept that. We have to examine it. But I do think the bar should be incredibly high for both DH and reliever just for that reason. So right now we have Edgar Martinez. And yes, we have a lot of relievers, but from I think we should be very picky when it comes to relievers. And Mariano Rivera is really the only one I could vote for in a slam dunk kind of sense.
Do you guys ever have these discussions with other writers or other people? I mean, Alex, you mentioned that you spoke with people. Yeah, Dan, tell me, people ask that question. They want to know how you guys go about it and who you talk to, and if you're looking to get your mind changed or you're looking to change minds. How does that work?
Been doing it forever. I mean, I've been voting since '88, and it's you want to talk to as many people as you can, especially before the years of interleague play, National League guys. I remember when Garvey got on the ballot, I voted for Garvey right away. And I had all these National League guys telling me, no, he's not a Hall of Famer. I looked at it again and I stopped voting for him. I was talked out of it by guys who saw him a lot. I still feel a little bad about that because I try to be consistent. I think that's the fair way to do it. But yeah, so I remember with Ortiz, the last year he played in 16, just going to New York and it was like a column that day talking to every New York guy I could find because they're tough, they're discerning, they're discriminating. Will you vote for Ortiz 5 years from now? And I think everybody said yes that I asked that day. So I'm like, okay, he's getting in because these guys aren't holding anything against him. He's getting in. That to me was a good tell where it was going to be 5 years from now.
Katie, I can just tell you that many pregame dining areas in a press box, when writers from different papers were sitting down together, it even long before I ever had a vote, like I was just a sponge at many of those tables sitting with people who did have a vote because you would just, sometimes it literally was guys trying to convince Mike Messina. How many times, Pete, did people get into the Mike Messina debate, or Wagner would be another one, me coming from the New York market. But yeah, you want to, sometimes you're standing on the soapbox and telling somebody you think should be in, and other people, you're trying to sway other people, and other times you're listening to other people. It's a great, it's one of the greatest things in sports are these debates, right? Debates in general. And I think it's if the readers are truly interested in that, I can promise you they would love to be a fly on the wall in some of those press boxes.
It's not just the personal conversations, it's what you read too.
Yeah.
And you do, and part of the homework. There's no one. There's a lot of things go into the homework process and the research process. And I mentioned already that I was influenced by the National League respect for Rollin, and so that was a large influence on why I decided finally to vote for Scott Rolen.
Same here, Bob. Exactly. I never really saw Scott Rolen play that much. He just was in the American League briefly, and yeah, I talked to National League writers, and it's like, you saw him play. Do the numbers tell the whole story? It's like, no, he's a Hall of Famer. So
as an aside, go ahead.
It's like I would have been happy to lobby, for example, which I did, for Edgar Martinez, who I thought was, most respected right-hand hitter in the league for a significant period of time. And I'm not sure that because of the DH bias that still exists and it'll be interesting to see with Poppy if we can ever find out what the percentage of National League oriented voters versus American League oriented voters will be when in the final analysis. Because I thought from the beginning the thing that will hurt him more than any taint of the 03 name, that very dubious thing that his name was allegedly on, or whatever was the DH thing. I still think it's going to hurt him more than any remote drug allegations. That's what I think.
I know Michael Sullivan would know better, but I know Pedro once said that Edgar Martinez was the toughest batter he ever faced.
You can ask Pedro on Monday and he'd say that. And you ask him on Tuesday, it was Derek Jeter. And on Wednesday, it was Gary Sheffield. So, I mean, who might argue with Pedro, but that toughest hitter seemed to, all I know is that it was not Jorge Posada. So that's it.
No. You know, well, Edgar got in is his 10th year, I think, right? On the ballot, his final year.
Was it? Jesus.
Yeah, it was close to the end of his time on the ballot for about 6 years. And Dan will remember this because he was with me. The wireless password at Safeco Field was Edgar HOF. So every writer who went to Seattle had to go Edgar HOF on their laptop. That's right. And I don't know how many votes he got because of that, but Seattle did a good job of putting him in people's minds. I know that.
All right, good subconscious. Has anyone ever been lobbied by a player or a player's teammate or friend to try to get them in the Hall of Fame?
Yes.
No.
Wow.
I've asked guys, but I haven't had them lobby me.
We don't have to name names.
I'll be happy to name names. I was at an event and Johnny Damon came up to me and said, "Do you think I'm a Hall of Famer?" And I said, "I got to be honest, Johnny, I don't think you are." And he gave me this stat where he was one of like the only guys in history with this many home runs, this many doubles, this many triples, this many RBIs, this many, it was like you kind of came up with a stat. And I said, well, yeah, that's interesting, but I don't know if that's going to put you in the Hall of Fame. And but he wasn't like campaigning. You just wanted to mention it to me. It was funny. So.
I like it. That is very funny.
So much like Damon. I should have thought of that if I was going to guess a guy. Good. I love that story.
Have you ever regretted someone who got in? If someone got in that you voted for and you regretted doing it, you changed your mind about them being a Hall of Famer. Not talking about character clause situations where guys turn out to be bad dudes after the fact. Was there anyone who you had on a ballot, they got in there, and then you were like, you know what, I probably shouldn't have voted for him because I don't think he's Hall of Fame worthy?
No, I think the thing we all share is disdain for the Veterans Committee or whatever committees we're talking about with some people. I don't want to mention the name about a certain designated hitter who was born in the Eastern Shore of Maryland that is the punching bag, who is the punching bag for all of us and on what's wrong with the Veterans Committee. And I feel bad for the poor guy. It's not his fault. He didn't do anything wrong, except he wasn't good enough to get in the Hall of Fame. I think we were pretty unanimous on that one, but somehow he's in there.
Right. You should, all the readers who grouse about writers' votes, you should hear the writers grouse about the Veterans Committee.
Yeah. So who do the veterans guys grouse about?
Yeah.
Gotta go down the chain.
That's
everyone who criticizes though.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. No, that was a question that we got submitted, and another one that's here in the live chat is I think I'll preface this. I think that we all think that it's good that writers vote for the Hall of Fame, or else we wouldn't be able to be on here talking with you guys, and this is really fun. And Bob told us a little bit earlier when we were prepping this about why it ended up that way. And so Bob, I want you to explain to what you said to us earlier about why writers do vote for the Hall of Fame. And, do you guys think that's fair? Do you think that the process should change or grow in any sort of way?
The writers vote because in 1936, when the Hall of Fame was conceived, it didn't open until 39. But when they had the first, as a building, but when they had the first class inducted in 1936, the only viable source were writers. There was no broadcast community as such. It was broadcasting of baseball was in an embryonic state in 1936. Okay, it had begun in 1921 with Harold Arlen doing the KDK, but it wasn't very widespread. There wasn't a large community of broadcasters. That was a mistake then. I have said, I already said it once earlier tonight. We all have a vote, and Vince Scully doesn't. Joe Castiglione, who probably who's an encyclopedia of baseball, doesn't have a vote. On and on and on and on. They should have been included a long time ago, and I firmly believe that. But we're qualified to vote, and they're as much or more qualified to vote. They should be involved.
Well, if I can amplify what Bob just said, it goes to one of the problems about guys not getting in on the first ballot. So you had your first class of 5 guys go in, and then it took them decades to catch up with guys of a century of baseball to get all the people in. That's why DiMaggio doesn't go in the first ballot. And then later on, writers will say, well, DiMaggio didn't go in the first ballot, so Willie Mays can't go in, Ken Griffey can't go in. So that would be the irrational logic that would be applied to keep people from not being unanimous up until Rivera. And that's how that happened, in my view.
That's a great point, but it's, should never have gotten to that point. But
No, of course.
that's great. That's a great explanation.
Bob, there's so many in the broadcasting community who clearly know as much about baseball. It's not something I have to admit, Katie, that I've thought a ton about. Is there an element, I'm curious, especially for some of you guys who've covered baseball for so long, that, as employees of newspapers who are not employed by the teams, like that we are supposed to be more impartial, if you will, just by nature of what it is we do as newspaper writers. Is that an element, do you think? Was there some concern perhaps about not having, a lot of team broadcasters are team employees. And would they be biased toward a team? Do you know if that's ever been any of the consideration?
I don't know. You'd have to ask the powers that be at the Hall and to start. I don't know. That's a good question. I would certainly think that it's a preposterous notion to think that they wouldn't be honorable enough to, most of them, 90% of them, 99%.
Yeah.
There might be some, some homer deviant in there, but anyway, no, I don't know. I don't know. The answer to the question is, that's a great question, and I do not know.
All right, we're getting close on time, and there's a couple others I wanted to touch on.
Yes.
Big question from people, and just because we were talking about the Veterans Committee, this is a good segue. Will Dwight Evans eventually get into the Hall of Fame?
Well, the last time he was on the subcommittee of the Veterans Committee, I can't remember exactly what it was called. He came close. He was the first player. He needed one more vote to get in. He didn't get that vote. I think the next time he's up, assuming he's on the ballot, I mean, it's going to be weird. I think Harold Baines getting in is going to influence a lot of people to say, how is Harold Baines in and Dwight Evans isn't in? Dwight Evans is clearly a better player than Harold Baines. So I think Dewey's trending in the right direction in terms of the Veterans Committee. I certainly hope so.
Do we know
thought
when it
there
might be?
is that Bobby Abreu might be an interesting. The Bobby Abreu case might be an interesting parallel to Dwight Evans because in some ways their careers followed somewhat similar trajectories where they were not dominant early in their careers. They became better and better over the course of time, and their strengths were the versatility of their games, but they weren't all stars on a repetitive perennial basis. So I do wonder now. The Veterans Committees are very separate from the BBWAA, but if you see a groundswell for Bobby Abreu over time, I do wonder whether or not that could have a positive influence on Dewey.
Dewey is one of the very few people, I haven't tracked Abreu in this regard, whose decade of the 30s was substantially better than his decade of the 20s. You don't need this to count the number of guys about whom that's the case.
And I also think people now have a greater appreciation for how good he was defensively. Kind of people loving defenses, but that's become more of a modern thing. I feel.
That was another question that we got, was like not necessarily how to quantify it. We probably don't have time to get into it, but just like as it just becomes so much more stats driven, and that's something that we look at, like how will great defensive players who aren't great hitters ever have a chance to become Hall of Famers? And
JBJ 2030.
That's what I was thinking of.
Oh, yeah.
No,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, we alluded to Rollins' defense. I alluded to Andrew Jones' defense. It's a substantial reason why, not the primary reason why I voted for him ultimately. The goal was 434 homers. But no, it is growing. I think Pete's right. I hope Pete's right. I hope people are paying more and more attention to that. And maybe the Mazeroski thing wasn't a little bit of influence in getting people to focus more on the defense.
It's just on its own, Katie, it's never going to be enough to get somebody in the Hall of Fame. Like,
right.
Hitting on its own impacts the game throughout all 9 innings. Every time you're at the plate, it's part of the whole thing. Defense, it only, it's just not enough on its own. It can bolster somebody, maybe, like I love hearing these guys talk about Roland in that way, and that stuff that's going into my head as a voter. influence and push up somebody as like a final qualification, but it's never going to be the first thing to get a guy in. It's just not enough.
I think we asked this question last year, but everyone likes it. So we're gonna, we get a lot of submissions about it. So we'll do it again. Current players who are slam dunk Hall of Fame choices.
Well, Buster Posey, who just retired.
Oh, it's a good one.
Years now.
Clayton Kershaw.
I think Trout is pretty much done enough at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Pujols, Scherzer.
Who holds?
Yeah.
Cabrera, Miguel Cabrera.
Probably Verlander.
Yeah, I think he's going to have. I don't think he'll have any trouble. I wouldn't think.
Have you guys seen what next year's ballot looks like for the first year class?
Actually, no.
It's a little bleak.
It's going to be Jeff Kent again, Dan.
It might be.
So we're ignoring the elephant in the room, Katie?
About Kurt Schilling.
We're ignoring I mean, come on. That's the second biggest topic after.
I know. That's fair. That's fair. And it's not necessarily for politics reasons, but I feel like a lot of us tread that ground last year. And I don't know that it moves a lot. I mean, Bob Holler was one who honored the request, took him off there.
Yeah, I think Dan and I both did. As I said, I think, I voted for him 9 years. This would have been the 10th. And, but he, after he lost last year, I said he took his ball and went home. And, he said, hey, don't vote for me. I'm out. So I'm out too. He's the game over. I'm done voting for him, but that's just me. Is he still worthy? Sure, but I mean, he doesn't want us to vote for him. So, in my view, I'm not voting for him.
I didn't want to give him the satisfaction, guys.
Yeah.
No, me too.
I refuse to give him the satisfaction because that would only bolster his argument that he made that it's a biased thing and has nothing to do with his baseball. I'm not going to give him that satisfaction. I voted for him. I continue to vote for him. I was unaware, I must admit, that he had come down and support. I'm not surprised. I didn't know he made a public declaration about January 6th. All right, which is disturbing. But apparently he did. I didn't know that because I knew enough of the other stupid things he said. So, but I continue to vote for him on baseball merits. I think he's a slam dunk Hall of Famer on merit.
I thought the best thing last year was he complained about getting 71.1% of the votes and condemned the baseball writers in their entirety for only giving him 71% of the votes, which would be the greatest landslide in any election history, getting 71% of a vote. So I don't know. I find the whole thing tiresome, him constantly complaining about the vote when, 70% of us gave him a vote.
Right, exactly.
I think there's canceled. Far from canceled. Yeah. He hasn't been canceled or anything. And I sort of with Bob, like I wouldn't even give him the satisfaction of getting off the ballot. For me, it's, as I use that phrase a lot, but hold my nose and vote. It's definitely like, this is the period you played it. This is the box. The box is when you played baseball. And that's what I voted on.
I'm glad he's off the ballot after this. I'm very happy about that.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think that there's
positively.
a lot of people. Yeah. So we're almost at time. So I gotta wrap us up. Good joke in there from the people watching. Someone asking who's the first opener who's going to make it into the Hall of Fame. Just a chilling thought to think.
It'll be a Tampa Bay.
Well, that's Kind Bloom.
It'll be a Ray, whoever it is.
Yes, so I really appreciate everyone for joining us tonight. We have some other really great stuff coming up. If Ortiz does get into the Hall of Fame, that announcement's on January 25th, and so you should definitely check out. Well, you should check out bostonglobe.com/sports all the time because although baseball is in a lockout, we're still writing about it. We're really, really grateful for everyone to be here. Thank you so much for you guys for coming on and being good sports about all of this. And it's been a great night. So thank you so much. And thanks for reading the Boston Globe.
Thanks everyone.
Sure, everybody.